Hey everyone, ever heard of the four horsemen of the apocalypse? They're one of the most intriguing and mysterious symbols in the Bible, described in the book of Revelation, chapter 6. But what do they really mean? Are they just a metaphor, or do they have a prophetic meaning for today? Today, we're going to unpack what each of these horsemen represents and how it might connect to the world we live in. Let's get started. The first horseman, the white horse and the bow of deceptive conquest. The first horseman of the apocalypse, described in Revelation 6:2, rides a white horse and carries a bow. He's often associated with conquest, but not a noble or righteous one. Instead, this horseman symbolizes a deceptive form of domination, representing false leaders, distorted ideologies, and the spread of lies that can seduce and corrupt hearts and minds. To better understand this figure, we need to dive into the biblical references, historical context, and the circumstances surrounding this revelation. In the book of Revelation, written by the Apostle John during his exile on the island of Patmos, the rider on the white horse is the first of four horsemen released when the seals of the heavenly scroll are opened. The description in Revelation 6:2 says, "I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest." The white horse might seem like a symbol of purity or victory at first glance, but in the apocalyptic context, it carries ambiguity. While Jesus is portrayed riding a white horse as the true conqueror in other biblical passages like Revelation 19:11, the horseman of the first seal appears to be a deceptive imitation. He carries a bow, but there's no mention of arrows, suggesting a conquest based on appearances, persuasion, or deceit rather than brute force. Throughout history, theologians and scholars have interpreted the rider on the white horse in various ways. Some associate him with historical figures who used persuasion and deception to conquer nations. For example, during the Roman Empire, many emperors presented themselves as saviors and peacemakers while expanding their dominion through political and military strategies that often involved manipulation and propaganda. Another common interpretation is that the horseman represents false prophets or misleading ideologies that emerge throughout history. Jesus warned in Matthew 24:24, "For false messiahs and false prophets will appear and perform great signs and wonders that would deceive even the elect, if that were possible." This warning echoes the idea that the rider on the white horse doesn't conquer through physical strength, but through lies and illusions that seem convincing. In the modern era, the symbolism of the rider on the white horse seems more relevant than ever. We live in a world flooded with information, where the line between truth and lies often becomes blurred. Social media, algorithms, and the rapid spread of fake news create a fertile ground for mass manipulation. How often are we influenced by narratives that seem true but are distorted or completely false? How often do we follow leaders or ideologies that promise miraculous solutions but ultimately lead us down paths of destruction? The rider on the white horse warns us to be vigilant. In 1 John 4:1, we're urged, "Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." This exhortation is a call to discernment, to question sources of information, and to seek the truth amidst the chaos. The first horseman of the apocalypse, mounted on his white horse and carrying a bow, is a powerful and disturbing figure. He reminds us that not all that glitters is gold, and not every leader or ideology that presents itself as a savior deserves our trust. In a world where disinformation and deception are powerful weapons, we're called to be vigilant, to seek the truth, and to stand firm on solid principles. Just as early Christians were warned about false prophets and deceptive teachings, we must also be aware of the modern horsemen who seek to conquer our minds and hearts with empty promises and seductive lies. The message of the rider on the white horse is clear. True conquest doesn't come through deception, but through integrity, justice, and authentic faith. May we therefore walk with discernment and resist the false conquests that seek to lead us astray from the path of truth. The second horseman, the rider on the red horse. The second horseman of the apocalypse, described in Revelation 6:3-4, appears riding a red horse, carrying a large sword. This horseman is often associated with war, bloodshed, and the chaos that accompanies human conflict. The apocalyptic vision presented by the Apostle John in the book of Revelation is full of symbolism, and the red horse, with its vibrant and menacing color, evokes images of violence and destruction. The red color of the horse is a powerful symbol, often associated with blood, war, and aggression. In the Bible, red can also represent sin and judgment, as in Isaiah 1:18, where it says, "Though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be as white as snow." The sword that the horseman carries is an instrument of death and conflict, reinforcing the idea that his mission is to bring war and discord. In Matthew 10:34, Jesus states, "Do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." This passage highlights that, in certain contexts, division and conflict are inevitable, especially when it comes to matters of faith and justice. Throughout history, humanity has been marked by wars and conflicts. From the ancient battles described in the Old Testament, such as the wars of Israel against the Philistines, to the modern conflicts that plague entire nations, war seems to be a constant in the human experience. The rider on the red horse can be seen as a prophetic representation of this reality. In Ezekiel 38-39, for example, there's a detailed description of a great eschatological battle known as the War of Gog and Magog, which many interpret as a future conflict of global proportions. In today's world, the presence of the rider on the red horse seems more evident than ever. News of wars, terrorism, ethnic conflicts, and political disputes dominate the daily headlines. World War I and World War II, the conflicts in the Middle East, the civil wars in Africa, and the geopolitical tensions between superpowers are clear examples of how war continues to shape the course of history. In Matthew 24:6-7, Jesus warns, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." The rider on the red horse reminds us of the fragility of peace and the importance of seeking reconciliation and unity, even amidst differences. The Bible emphasizes the importance of peace and justice, as in Psalm 34:14. "Turn from evil and do good, seek peace and pursue it." In Romans 12:18, Paul exhorts, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." These passages highlight the individual and collective responsibility to promote harmony and avoid conflict. The second horseman, mounted on the red horse, is a powerful and disturbing figure that symbolizes war and violence. His presence in the apocalyptic narrative serves as a warning to humanity, reminding us of the devastating consequences of conflict and the importance of seeking peace. In a world where war seems to be a constant, the challenge is to find ways to overcome divisions and build a future based on justice, compassion, and reconciliation. As Christians, we're called to be peacemakers, Matthew 5:9, and to reflect the love of Christ, who is the only one capable of bringing true peace to the world. The third horseman, the black horse and famine. The third horseman of the apocalypse, described in Revelation 6:5-6, rides a black horse and carries a pair of scales in his hand. This horseman is often associated with famine, scarcity, and economic inequality. His figure is one of the most impactful among the four horsemen, as it represents one of the oldest and most persistent scourges of humanity: hunger. The black color of the horse evokes darkness, death, and hopelessness, while the scales symbolize the measurement of food, indicating times of rationing and crisis. In the biblical text, when the third seal is opened, the rider on the black horse appears with scales, and a voice proclaims, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay, and do not damage the oil and the wine." Revelation 6:6. This passage reflects a situation of extreme scarcity, where the prices of basic foods, such as wheat and barley, are inflated, making them inaccessible to many. The denarius was a day's wage at the time, meaning that in this scenario, a person would have to spend their entire daily wage to buy a minimal amount of food. The mention of oil and wine, which should not be damaged, suggests that even in times of famine, there's a disparity between those who suffer and those who still have access to luxuries. This highlights social and economic inequality, a theme that remains relevant today. Throughout history, famine has been one of the greatest human tragedies, often aggravated by wars, natural disasters, and mismanagement. A striking historical example is the Great Famine in Ireland, 1845-1852. Where the scarcity of potatoes, the main food of the population, led to the death of approximately 1 million people and the mass emigration of many others. Another example is the famine in Ukraine, known as the Holodomor, 1932-1933, which resulted from repressive policies of the Soviet regime and caused millions of deaths. These historical events show how famine is not only a consequence of natural factors, but also of human decisions and unjust economic systems. The rider on the black horse, therefore, represents not only the scarcity of food, but also the power structures that perpetuate inequality and misery. Today, in a world of abundance and technological advances, hunger is still a reality for millions of people. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, more than 820 million people go hungry in the world. Economic inequality, armed conflicts, climate change, and poor distribution of resources are some of the factors that contribute to this situation. The rider on the black horse challenges us to reflect on our role in this scenario. As individuals and as a society, what are we doing to combat hunger and inequality? The Bible exhorts us to care for those in need, as it's written in James 2:15-16. Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? The third horseman is not only a symbol of judgment, but also a call to action. He invites us to be agents of change amidst inequality. This can be done through donations, volunteering, supporting public policies that promote social justice, and raising awareness about food waste. In Matthew 25:35-40, Jesus says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." The rider on the black horse is a powerful figure that reminds us of the devastating consequences of hunger and inequality. He challenges us to look beyond our own needs and act in favor of those who suffer. In a world where abundance coexists with scarcity, we're called to be instruments of justice and compassion, reflecting the love and mercy of God. May we, as individuals and as a society, work to restore the scales of justice and equity, and may hunger be eradicated once and for all. The fourth horseman of the apocalypse, mounted on a pale or ashen horse, is one of the darkest and most impactful figures described in the biblical book of Revelation, specifically in chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. This horseman is often associated with death and hell, and his appearance marks the climax of the consequences brought by the previous 3 horsemen. The horseman of the white horse, falsehood or conquest, the horseman of the red horse, war, and the horseman of the black horse, famine. Let's explore this theme in more detail, using biblical and historical references to enrich our understanding. In the biblical text, the fourth horseman is described as follows: "Then I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Revelation 6:8. The pale or ashen color of the horse is often interpreted as a symbol of disease, decay, and death. This hue refers to the pallor of a corpse or the extreme weakness caused by illness. The horseman, named Death, personifies destruction in its most absolute form, and Hades, hell, following him, represents the final destination of those who succumb to his actions. The fourth horseman is the culmination of the disasters brought by the first three. He doesn't act alone, but is a direct consequence of falsehood, war, and famine. His presence reminds us that human actions have profound consequences and that death is inevitable. However, he also serves as a call to reflection on the brevity of life and the need to live with purpose. 1. Falsehood, white horse. The first horseman, often associated with false peace or deceptive conquest, sets the stage for disorder. He can represent leaders or ideologies that promise solutions but bring destruction. Historical reference. Throughout history, empires and authoritarian regimes have emerged promising peace and prosperity, but ended up generating conflicts and suffering, as in the case of the Nazi regime or modern dictatorships. Okay, here's the translated text, adjusted for clarity and naturalness in American English. 2. War, red horse. The second horseman brings armed conflicts that devastate nations and take lives. Historical reference. World wars, such as World War I and World War II, are clear examples of how war can lead to mass death and global chaos. 3. Famine, black horse. The third horseman represents food scarcity and economic inequality. Historical reference. The Great Famine in Ireland, 1845-1852, and the famine crises in Ethiopia in the 1980s show how devastating famine can be. 4. Death, pale horse. The fourth horseman is the ultimate result of these calamities. He not only kills, but also symbolizes hopelessness and total destruction. Biblical reference. In Ezekiel 14:21, God speaks of sending his 4 severe judgments, sword, famine, wild beasts, and plague, to judge a nation. This echoes the description of the fourth horseman. The fourth horseman confronts us with the reality of mortality. The Bible frequently reminds us that life is brief and uncertain. James 4:14 says, "What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes." This horseman challenges us to reflect on how we are living our lives and whether we are prepared for what truly matters, our relationship with God and our spiritual legacy. Throughout history, the fourth horseman has been interpreted in various ways. 1. Literal interpretation. Some see the horseman as a symbol of plagues and diseases that plague humanity. The Black Death in the 14th century, which killed millions in Europe, is often cited as a historical example that aligns with this view. 2. Symbolic interpretation. Others understand the horseman as a representation of spiritual death, resulting from sin and separation from God. In this sense, the hell that follows him would be the eternal destiny of those who reject salvation. 3. Eschatological interpretation. In the context of the end times, the fourth horseman is seen as part of the events that precede the return of Christ. He would be one of the signs that alert humanity to the need for repentance and faith. The fourth horseman, riding the pale horse, is a figure who confronts us with the reality of death and the consequences of our choices. He reminds us that life is short and that we should live with purpose, seeking truth and justice. While the other horsemen represent specific challenges, the fourth horseman reminds us that, in the end, we will all face death. The question remains, are we prepared for what truly matters? As Psalm 90:12 says, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." May we reflect on this message and seek to live in a way that glorifies God, even in the midst of the adversities brought by the horsemen of the apocalypse. The four horsemen of the apocalypse aren't just an old story. They're a warning, a call to reflect on the world we live in and the choices we make. They remind us that even in the midst of chaos, there is still hope and the possibility of change. What do you think these horsemen represent today? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more reflections like this. See you next time.